So, Tony, you are one of the writers on the new film, The Favorite, which is a leading contender for many Oscars this year. Uh, Take us back to the beginning of your involvement in this. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the project.
I got involved when sort of just after Yorgos got involved. It had been Deborah had the idea and had a script, and I think Yorgos had read it and liked the story a lot, and then he just was looking for someone to who sort of suited his sensibility, I guess he would say. And so he'd read a lot of things, and then he read something he liked of mine, and then we got on the phone and started talking, and then we sort of had a very quick, we just quickly understood the kind of film. I understood what he wanted to make, and he sort of knew what I did, and we felt like we'd be a really good match. And then from there, we just we started with the story, and we just sort of wanted to re-engineer our period movie in a way and write the story of these three women. And so I was in Australia, he was in London, we would Skype, and I would come here, and I would do a draft and come and hang out with him. And then we just kept doing that for 5 or 6 years, and then we made it, and here we are.
I'm really curious, given the kinds of films that Yorgos Lanthimos makes, what exactly you wrote to appeal to his sensibilities. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, I've written a play called The Great, which was a period play about Catherine the Great, and I'd written another play called The Grenade that he liked a lot. So a more contemporary play. And yeah, I think I don't know. And as soon as we talked, we really got along and really understood each other, I guess.
Well, so you mentioned something about trying to, reconfigure the period film. And,
yeah.
I mean, this is, unlike any other kind of, costume royal drama that we've seen before. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you and Yorgos wanted to achieve in terms of flipping that kind of movie on its head?
I think because we both, he's Greek and I'm Australian, so we don't come from a strong tradition of those kind of movies, but we really just wanted it to be about people in a really contemporary way, not in a kind of, not the sense that we were looking back at something, very much the sense of these three women and the dilemmas they got up with every day to be very fresh as they were when we get up with our dilemmas, but their dilemmas are different because they're royal and all that kind of stuff. But we very much wanted to focus on their complicated humanity above all else. And we wanted it to feel, I don't know how people talked back then. So I wasn't worried about that too much. I was much more just trying to feel like I understood the characters, and that the way they spoke was sort of a slight hybrid. I knew I was writing a hybrid of language that was sort of contemporary, but also sort of period. And that seemed to make sense with what Yorgos, his sensibility, and then just the way we approached thinking about the scenes, and just was just to kind of things we liked, I guess, rather than things that were like the normal tropes of a period film.
Right. Did it, in the attempts to make it contemporary, did you kind of, as you were working on this over the 6 or 7 years, did you change it to kind of make it more in line with what's going on today at all? Was that at all a factor in your writing?
Not really, because I think we'd got, I think the first draft I wrote, we sort of felt we were 70% of the way. So, and that was 5 or 6 years ago. So we didn't really ever take it into account. I mean, we really were always about who the women were, that was the story we were telling, that we were putting this political story in the background and the men on the sidelines, and we kind of knew we were doing that. But we really didn't think about how the movie would relate to today, I think, other than that the women's responses to them had to feel like fresh and now contemporary in a way.
I guess people always just see current events in whatever movie.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Yeah, you make a movie over such a long period, and then if you're lucky, it seems to tally up with what's going on when it comes out.
Right. Did you do any kind of research on your own into Queen Anne to try to get a sense of who she was while you were writing this character?
Yeah, I mean, we had some. So the producers had some notes, and of course, I had what I had. You know what Deborah had done. So I sort of had a sense of the story, and then there was a lot of the story I wanted to, that Yorgos and I decided to strip away a lot of the history and get to something much more essential. So even though we sort of knew what was going on, and we would go back to it sometimes, if we had a problem, we would go, oh, well, what really happened? And so a lot of it is what happened, but a lot of it's us stripping it back to a really essential truth of it, I guess, is what we were looking for.
Right. The film explores female sexuality in a really interesting way. I mean, in the way that, these three women have sort of a weird love triangle, and they're Lady Sarah, played by Rachel Weisz, and Abigail, played by Emma Stone, are both appealing to the queen through a way of sex. Can you talk a little bit about crafting that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I suppose I crafted. I think I was really like, I just would go back to what drove the women, and they all were driven by different things. And for Anne, it was a desire for love, and for Sarah, it was a mix of patriotism and love for Anne, and for Abigail, it was very much about a desire for safety. So I just followed that, and I don't think we wanted to comment on, the love triangle, or, we were just like, that's what they were doing to get what they wanted, and we didn't want to make that, it's sort of like, it's just, that was just part of their lives, I guess,
Right.
And so we were just like, let's just be true to that in a really like simple, truthful way, that's not it's what the movie's, it's not what the movie's about per se, but it is a strong element of the movie, and it's interesting that happened at that time and what that meant and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's the kind of thing that can also very easily kind of rear into exploitation. You know what I mean? Like, so was that a concern at all, or
not really? Because I think we were never that never occurred to us that.
Yeah.
And I think what Yorgos is interested in, that would never happen in the way he approaches the characters in a movie that he's dealing with. And I think so. I guess it could easily, and I guess I don't think in the writing it was just the next beat of what they were doing, and what drove them to that point was more interesting to us. And and I guess how he shot it, and it's clear it's not exploitative in that way, and and I think the actresses sort of felt it was very true and very simple. So
yeah. Excuse me.
No, that's right.
Talk a bit about developing the rivalry, the characters of Lady Sarah and Abigail. Can you talk a bit about their attributes and how you kind of played the two of them off of each other?
Yeah, well, I guess as soon as you decide it's a triangle, you're in business, So I think it was just that. It was very much setting up, like I just, that Anne and Sarah did have this beautiful friendship, and they did, but it wasn't like a completely pure friend, and that was the thing for Yorgos and I, that everything about these women was complicated. They were good sometimes, and they behaved badly. They behaved poorly, they behaved well, they were true sometimes, they weren't true other times, like everybody is. So I think we always wanted that in the triangle, that it wasn't like Emma's characters, Abigail's all bad, and Sarah's love's all pure, and because it's not. It's mixed with patriotism, and it's mixed with a desire for power for her, but there is a true love there, and she's, for Rachel's character, it is a complicated mix of love, desire for power, patriotism, and all those three things are what's messy for her in her love for Anne. And for Anne, it's like Sarah can't give her enough, and she wants so much, and she doesn't have any power despite being the queen, and the frustrations of that. And then you throw into the mix this young woman who has lost everything, who has nothing to lose except, parts of a very human part of herself, which she I didn't want her character, and Emma plays it so well, of like, she sort of knows she's losing elements of herself as she rises, you know, and the good elements of herself are being stripped away. So I just wanted it to be a complicated triangle and a really robust triangle, that they really went at each other and they really had fun doing it in a way. And that their drives were really, you know, forceful, and they didn't step back from anything, and they weren't polite and they weren't demure about it, but the qualities in their character were complicated, but the things they want, you know, how they went about their business was very clear and crisp. So I was sort of interested in those, putting that all in play, and then throwing the men in occasionally on the side to mix it up a bit, you know.
I was actually going to ask you about the men. You mentioned sidelining them a bit.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we knew, I think when we first looked at the material, we, you know, we wanted to, the story, you know, I guess the normal way you would tell it is you would center up the politics much more and the men would play a bigger part. But the truth of it was, what was nice about the situation was it did sideline the men and the parliament, and they were kind of put in that place. So we were like, well, we want to do that because that's really interesting, that in that period of time, the women had all the sort of actual power, even though on the face of it, there was a prime minister and there was an opposition and all that kind of stuff. So it seemed satiric and it seemed funny. And I did some research and I found out, you know, that Nick Holt's side of politics, you know, that they did dress ridiculously, and they had that. And so we, you know, and Yorgos amped that up, obviously. And so we were interested in what that would do, and was it more interesting to us as a movie to make that choice, I suppose.
As I mentioned, you know, this film has gotten some Oscar buzz, including for yourself and Deborah. You guys have already gotten nominations at the Gothams and the British Independent Film Awards. What has that recognition meant for you? And I mean, for everybody involved too, because I mean, Yorgos has been recognized, the actresses, all the technicians for their brilliant work. Talk a bit about that.
Well, I think it's just, well, it's really, I mean, it's great, obviously. It's really gratifying, and it's really great because I think when I first saw the film, I thought what's amazing about, what I really loved about the film was everyone's work is so good. You know, the actors are so brilliant, and the production design by Fiona is so brilliant, and Sandy's costumes and the sound design, you know, it's just like every element, I feel like just works so well. And Yorgos just puts, you know, the sensibility of him and, you know, his incredible skills as a director to bring everyone together and everyone make the same film and everyone work. And it felt like that when we made it. I just felt like everyone who's making this film is really brilliant at their job. And so it's really great that everyone is getting, you know, to know that we made something really great, you know, and that people like it, you know.
Yeah, I think people, you know, I mean, the audiences I see in it, you know, they laugh uproariously at it. Actually, that reminds me, I wanted to ask you about the humor in it. I mean, was that, can you talk a bit about the kind of the humor that you guys put into that script? Was that something that was there from the beginning, or was that something that developed over time as you were putting the script?
Well, I guess no, I think when part of it was Yorgos liked the story originally, and then when he brought me on, he knew that was part of it. He, you know, he didn't want to make a straight period film, which was what it sort of was. And he really, you know, he knew from my scripts that I wrote funny stuff, and that it's stuff he thought was funny. And, you know, I think the thing was, from the start, we talked about the tone and what the tone should be. And it wasn't like we talked that much about it. It was like that we both knew exactly what we felt it should be together. And then it was about the dialogue and how I wanted the dialogue to be sharp, and, you know, the feel of it to be slightly off kilter. And so, yeah, we always said from the start, we went, let's make it a tragicomedy. So, you know, and that's sort of what we tried to achieve over that period, is how to tell that story and keep the comedy coming, but drift it into tragedy, but even then keep the comedy coming. So, that was sort of the thing, and we worked quite hard on making sure that balance was difficult often for us to, towards the end of the film, particularly the last third, was to keep enough balance so it didn't feel like an entirely different film, because the first 2/3 is really quite funny. So we sort of worked on it to, but yeah, the tone of it and the comedy was something, you know, all his films are funny, and you know,
in a very strange way.
yeah, in a strange way, but I really love his films, you know, and so I think, and he felt like I was the right person to bring that comedy, and so that's what we did.
Well, Tony McNamara, thank you so much. Congratulations on The Favorite. Appreciate your time.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Bye.